Hi everyone, happy lunchtime. It's lovely to have you all here and to be able to give a talk. Um, Amin gave a brief intro to me and mentioned a bit of my background. So as he said, I'm currently a product director at a company called Wazoku. So I'm not a data scientist by trade, but rather on the product side. So my job is all about thinking about how data and data science can be used effectively as part of different product offerings. And I'm coming at it from that perspective rather than kind of delving in really deeply to the data science side of things. So to tell you just a little bit more about what we do at Wazoku and the topic of my presentation today. Wazoku, actually, a fun fact for everyone to start with. Wazoku means a great idea in Swahili. We were talking a little bit when we were before the presentation, when Amin and I were chatting about the pronunciation, and it's a difficult one to pronounce, and that's the reason, because it is actually Swahili. But what we do at Wazoku is work with a whole range of different types of clients, so anything from banks to retail to public sector bodies, and we help them with their innovation processes. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about that and lay out some of the challenges that we're working on at Wazoku and some of the questions we're trying to grapple with around data that will help us support our clients in the process of innovation. And I'm going to say right now, I haven't got all the answers at this stage. It's very much work in progress. I actually joined the company in April, so I've been getting up to speed throughout this bizarre period of lockdown. But they are really interesting challenges, and it's a different application of data science. I wanted to share that with you. So to start with, I'm going to set the scene a little bit, the context. And my first question is really, what is innovation? And I think it depends on who you ask. And if you type it into Google, you get a whole load of different spins on what it is. But the general consensus is that it's not just about having a great idea to do something, but it's actually a whole set of things that turn that spark of an idea into something that maybe changes the way we live, changes how we consume things, changes how we work, how we exercise, all sorts of different things. And there were loads of great examples of innovation, and I'm going to just share a couple just to kind of get everyone thinking about the different types of innovation out there. So electric vehicles is one that we're seeing a lot about these days. There's an increasing number of hybrid and electric vehicles on the road. You're hearing about all the time about how the technology and batteries are being updated, taking even shorter amounts of time to charge. And we've also just heard in the UK that petrol and diesel cars will be banned from 2030. And I guess what this represents as well is the idea of a holistic industry change, because there's a lot of innovation needed around this whole area to make it actually practically possible, from actually production and design of the cars themselves to improvement in performance, as well as all of the infrastructure that surrounds it. So it's quite an interesting and complex innovation. Another one that caught my attention when I was looking at good examples was with Lego, actually. And at the moment, with the kind of environmental impact of plastic in mind, they are looking at what materials they can use to build their bricks that are more biodegradable, and they've come up with a new series of Legos that use this new material. So that's quite exciting. And then I think one that everyone's been waiting for since March is the COVID vaccine. And I think every time we turn on the TV at the moment, we're hearing about this. And fingers crossed, we're well on our way with it. There's still quite a little bit of work to go, but I think it's shown that in a quite short space of time, you can make remarkable progress on development of something like a vaccine. And I think some of the learnings coming out of this time period, for example, the synthetic vaccine that the Oxford group have developed, which is much cheaper to produce and easier to store, will probably have an impact on future developments of vaccines for years to come. There are also some innovations that perhaps haven't been quite successful. Um, Google Glass, which in an article that I read, they were referred to as trendy, creepy glasses, which is quite interesting and probably speaks. And they didn't quite take off in the consumer setting. But I think what I wanted to raise with this one is that actually there is hope, because Google are now thinking about different applications for this technology. And there's a lot of commercial applications that are being considered. So maybe with this one, although on the surface it might not seem quite as successful as hoped, perhaps it was just in the wrong context, and we'll pick up on that a little bit later. And then the final one, which I can say from experience was quite short-lived, and if perhaps you're a little bit younger than I am, or you don't recognize this because it was such a flash in the pan, this is a mini disc, and it's actually a relic that I have at home at the moment. But I can't say I've really listened to it. But really the point is just to highlight some of these innovations, really, that they come in all shapes and sizes and from a spectrum of different industries, which can have various impacts on our lives. And I think thinking about the process of innovation, it's got lots of different parts, and it can be quite complex. It's not just a case of having one brilliant idea and then it all happens. So at Wazoku, we are trying to think about how we can help support our clients with this. And we've learned a few things on the way from having done this from a number of years. And these are things that are now translating into some of the challenges that we have, which we'll talk about in a minute. So all of these innovations have something in common, and that's generally that they're solving a problem, so real world problems. Maybe it's making life better, maybe it's solving climate change, maybe it's being more convenience for people's lives, better communication. There's some fundamental need being addressed. I think it's also worth noting that solutions don't always originate from within the same industry, or perhaps just have the original application intended. So I know just talked about Google Glass in that context. Another example of this that I read about recently was with PepsiCo, who were looking for a way to cut the salt content in their snacks whilst keeping the taste of the salt. And they spent a lot of time thinking about it internally. They were looking in their food labs, doing experiments and all sorts of things. And then actually they came up with a solution off the back of some work that was being done on osteoporosis, which is really, you wouldn't naturally make that connection. And the osteoporosis researchers had developed a way of creating tiny particles of low sodium salt, or a salt-like substance, by smashing up calcium and regrowing it. So it's really interesting how, there are different connections between industries. Another example is dentistry and laundry, not two natural things that you would put together, but they have something in common, and they both want things to be sparkling white, whether that's teeth or your white clothes. And actually there's a lot of crossover there in terms of technology. And then I think the third thing that is quite important is that innovation can come from all over the place. It doesn't have to come from geniuses or specialists or experts. I mean, it's true in some cases you might need some quite in-depth knowledge around things. I don't think I could develop a vaccine, for example. But I think sometimes that can also be a bit of a hindrance when people are looking a little bit too inwardly and not thinking about the problem from a different perspective. And actually, from working with lots of different clients, we've seen great examples of innovation happening at lots of different levels. So whether that's internally in organizations, so for example, a bottom-up approach. We work with Waitrose quite a lot, and one of their great examples of innovation is just something simple as till receipts, and just asking customers whether they want a till receipt or not. And one of the ideas that came through from the shop floor was around till receipts, and they ended up saving hundreds of thousands of pounds by just not giving out receipts. And not to mention the kind of paper that they saved and the environmental impact. And it just becomes standard practice, and there's no legal obligation to do it. So it's just amazing that all it takes is one person making that connection, and it doesn't have to be someone sat at a very senior level or with really in-depth expertise. And then there's always the basic pattern. So we tend to see ideas going from conception to innovation through a series of iterations, whether that's being reviewed for practicality, looking at the ease of implementation, potential impact, and then they're refined and developed at various different points as well. So this leads us on to our data science challenges and some of the things that we're looking at in the team at Wazoku. So the first one is, how do we know who will be useful in innovation? So I hinted there that ideas don't always come from the places that you think. And traditionally, a lot of organizations have kind of looked inwards in terms of ideas and looked at their teams. And obviously, if you're in a process and you know it well, then you can usually come up with some good suggestions. But what we're starting to see being embraced more wholeheartedly is this idea of open innovation. And actually at Wazoku, we've just started or taken on Innocentive, which is an open innovation organization that has a crowd of people that can be consulted for all sorts of different challenges. So really there's lots of different layers, each of them have value, but you've got to think about, what kind of problem are you trying to solve and how best to match that. And it all sounds great that you're going out and reaching a crowd, but it can be a bit of a challenge, because how do you know where good ideas are coming from? So one of the things that we're currently looking at is how we can better match people to problems. And so what we're doing is we're trying to have a look at all of our historical data and work out in what instances people were solving particular types of problems. So is it people with certain characteristics or particular profiles that are better suited to certain challenges? And also, it's not just about the actual challenge itself, but also the different stages of the challenge. So you might have some people who are great at coming up with the initial ideas, but rubbish at implementing them. So one of the problems that we're working on at the moment is, how can we spot the connections between who's coming up with ideas and the successful ideas, and who's developing those ideas successfully, and how we can perhaps make that process more streamlined so that companies can get to innovation more quickly. And our long-term goal with that would be able to create the mechanisms then to prompt and encourage participation in various different activities. So that's the first challenge that we're working on. The second challenge, are all ideas good ideas, and do all good ideas lead to innovation? So what we're trying to work out, again, trawling through our data, is what makes a good idea. So when you have your process and you open up a challenge and you ask for suggestions, you might get hundreds of thousands of responses, and that on the surface might seem great. The more ideas there are, the more chance there'll be something successful in there that you can implement that will be revolutionary. But at the moment, for the majority of people we work with, that's a very manual process. And it relies on lots of different people giving input to try and evaluate those ideas and try and understand why they're good or bad, and when they'll work and when they won't work. So one of the things that we want to do is look at how we can automate that process a little bit more. And I'm going to just talk a little bit about what I called the anatomy of an idea, but how we're able to do that. So at the moment, our platform, when we collect an idea, and this is very tiny, so you probably can't read it, but don't worry, it almost acts as a central repository for ideas. So it essentially replaces the old-fashioned suggestion boxes or mailboxes where people message in and say, what about doing this? And we try and collect ideas in a certain way. And we get lots of different types of data coming in. And this is probably not an exhaustive list, to be quite honest, but we get things like people put in a title, they can add descriptions, you can ask specific questions in response to challenges, people can submit images, they could even submit videos. We ask them to think about the impact of ideas sometimes as well. So how much money do you think this will save? How much time do you think it will save? And then there's a kind of a layer that sits on top of that as well, which is the engagement around an idea. So once that's been submitted, what then happens to it? And we can look at different metrics for that. So for example, one of those is views. How many people are looking at that idea? How much interest is there? Are people commenting on that idea? And if they're commenting, what are they saying? And are there patterns in terms of engagement and success? And then again, the contributors, so not just the person that originated the idea, but perhaps people who are getting involved in the development of that idea. So maybe looking at where it's coming from. Maybe perhaps people have particular specialist fields or know certain things, and that's what's making the idea great. And so that's the kind of base layer. And then on top of that, we're doing some analysis and looking at, okay, so what does all of that mean? How can we use that data? And we're using various different techniques to have a look at that. We're still quite in early days on a lot of this, but for example, with some of the descriptions and the titles, we're looking at what NLP tools we can use. Maybe we can pull out high-level categories that help us understand what's in ideas. Maybe we can use the NLP to pull out specialist terms so that we can start to understand, are ideas submitted with a lot of detail around specialist areas going to be more successful in certain circumstances than others? We can look at things like object recognition and obviously speech to text for videos. So we sometimes do challenges around designing new parts or products, and actually some of those design patterns within the images might be really interesting to be able to analyze. And then kind of alongside all of this is, what are all of the relationships between these points? And the real complexity comes in that we run quite a few different types of challenges, and what we're trying to do is almost kind of profile those challenges to try and understand in which circumstances do each of these bits of, or each of these elements play a part, and what should we be looking for in successful ideas for each of these types of challenges, because that will help us in being able to sift through that initial batch of responses and speed up that process of innovation. So can we get to the innovation more quickly? And this is quite a lot of work for our small team. So we've just started on this, and this is one of the things that we're doing a bit of exploratory research on at the moment, just looking at our historical data points and trying to understand what are the key trends that make ideas successful. And then there's another challenge in how do we ask the right questions. So I think framing the challenges is something that can be really tricky, or framing the problem. And one of the things that we're trying to think about is, how can we help people ask questions better? And we do have consultants that work with clients internally who try and help think about this and guide them through the process. And it really can make a difference in terms of how you ask the question. And I think particularly when you're thinking about those cross-industry applications, if you ask something very, very specifically in a very, very detailed way, the answer that you might get is something very specific to that problem or that industry, and you might find that the people responding are very kind of narrow. So framing the question right can make quite a big difference. So one of the things we're looking at the moment is, what is a good way of setting up these challenges? Are there characteristics of the challenges that make some more successful than others? And I think that applies to how they're written, but it also applies to how they're executed as well. So is it something to do with how long the challenges are open? If people are given a really short space of time, does that force them to really think creatively and come up with something in a pressurized situation? And does that yield better results than if you let people have weeks and weeks and weeks to mull over a problem. So there are different kind of variables that we're looking at in terms of how the challenges are posed. And again, if you look at the anatomy of a challenge, you can see there are different ways of writing that. So maybe it's the text and language we can look at, maybe it's what's included in that write-up, maybe it's looking at how people are engaging, maybe it's also to do with who's asking the question. So again, there are various different variables, and we're layering on different techniques to try and analyze this data as well and come up with how to make sense of it, and then look at the relationship between these different types of data, and try and work out what's what. And all of this is quite complex, and we're just trying to grapple with it at the moment, but it's really interesting. And then finally, we've got a bit of a mission to try and put it all together. And I hinted a little bit earlier about ways that we might do this, and how we can kind of think about really using all of the ideas that we have. And the title of my presentation talks about how to never lose an idea again. And one of the things that we are trying to work with clients on is not just having this this very formal step-by-step process of innovation where you go out and you collect ideas, but also thinking about what it means to have a kind of global home for ideas, or an ecosystem of ideas. So people can go out and ask questions and get ideas, but actually what happens to all of those ideas that perhaps aren't right for the time that they're collected, or don't address the needs of the challenge that's posed at that specific time. And so there are a few different things we're working on. So this is kind of like number 4 in the sequence. So can we get loads of good ideas to begin with is sort of step number 1. Number 2 is how do we recognize those ideas? There's how do we ask the right questions to get lots of ideas? And then this is kind of how do we then put all of that information together? So if we know certain combinations of challenges and ideas are most successful, how do we work out those pathways so that we can connect those ideas to challenges? How do we work out who is going to be best to answer challenges? And that's, you know, obviously very, very tricky, but what we're hoping to achieve with that is to be able to allow organizations or bodies or whoever to really use all of the ideas that they have, and be able to kind of find them at the right time, for the right moment to answer the right question, so that nothing is ever wasted. And so that's kind of our long-term goal. And there'll be different ways of implementing this. So one of the outputs we're looking at is how can we build recommendation engines, perhaps to match people with challenges, or how can we build recommendation engines to match ideas with challenges and make sure we can start seeing the value. We're also looking at things like gamification. So how can we encourage certain types of behaviors to make sure that that process of innovation is successful, whether that's from gathering the idea in the first place to development of that idea to execution of that idea in the long run. So there's a whole load of things that we're working on, and they're all really big challenges, but they're all really exciting, and there's a lot of kind of things to think about. Yeah, so that was just what I wanted to share with you today, just some of the things that we're working on at Wazoku and some of those big challenges, and I'm very happy to take any questions on that and discuss any of those points.
Fantastic. Usually, as a data scientist, we go to this a big organization and we try to solve a challenge. But I think what you guys are doing is actually even creating more challenges, so people should come up and come up with answering those challenges with helping these 4 ideas that you mentioned. It's really interesting. I really enjoyed it. Do you mind if we start with a couple of questions that are coming, and I'm going to start with a question that I had in mind as you were speaking. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Right. So for me, it's always important to see what kind of KPI any business has, and then as a data scientist, how can I help with that KPI? Sometimes
Mm.
money, sometimes time, and etc. So if I join today at Wazuku and I tell you what is your very important KPI that I can help with that, what would it be?
For the company of Wazoku.
Yes.
Well, our sort of strapline slogan um, is, our mission is to to change the world one idea at a time, which sounds a little bit cringy. um, but I think one of our biggest missions is like, how can we speed up that innovation process? How can we help clients to go from having the problem to getting those ideas in to actually making something amazing? So I'd say one of the kind of key metrics is like, how do we use our data and data science to try and speed up that time to innovation uh, timeline, just to
Oh, that
shorten
would
that
work.
down. Yeah.
That would work. So if someone can help up to speed up the number of innovation, or how from the beginning until from the
Yeah.
ideation to bring it up, and
And I guess what's key with that is like, it's got to be good innovation though. So it can't just be,
of
how
course,
do we get to
not,
executing something? It has to be
not like
something
that Google Glass.
that exactly. It has to be something that's showing benefit. And it's interesting that you mentioned measures as well, because lots of our businesses measure innovation in different ways actually. So um, a lot of people, it's very financially driven. Lots of commercial companies are
Good.
like that, but we're seeing a lot more goals around things like sustainability as well, which is really interesting. So I guess it's kind of time to innovation and impact of innovation as well.
Yeah, makes sense. And there are plenty of data science areas that it may come with the title of data scientist, but you may need some level of expertise that they have. For example, there are some data scientists that are really good analysts, and they can help you with exploratory analysis, as you mentioned. From the stages where you are, do you need more data engineers? Do you need um, data analysts, or do you need data scientists inside, someone who put things into production? Or you may say a combination of them. Which type of team you need the most now?
I think we need everything. I think you're right. I think it is a real combination. And obviously, I'm coming from a bit of a different perspective because I am coming from the product side of things. But one of the things that I really believe in is having cross-functional teams, because I think they bring the most value. And it's thinking about, across the whole data science spectrum, what is going to make your team work. And I think it's having a little bit of everything, because you need the people that can come in and analyze the data and spot those patterns. You need engineers that can then go away and execute things. And then we've also got lots of like nice tools and visualizations and dashboards, and it's how you communicate that information as well. So we're a very small team at Wazoku at the moment, and there's only about so there's 2 data scientists right now, and then our engineering team as well that kind of dip in. So it's very small, and we've got a lot of problems to solve, as I just outlined. So I'd love a bit more of everything, to be quite honest, but we're having to be really disciplined and focused.
Yeah. Especially the recommendation engines you mentioned, that they sounds and look really exciting and
Hmm.
challenging project to have someone to come in
Yeah,
and understand
yeah,
and
we've actually executed idea to challenge recommendations to some degree, and it's kind of varying in success. And what we want to do, we've done it at the moment on comparing words, so comparing descriptions within ideas and descriptions within challenges. But I don't think that really tells the whole story, because it's kind of relying on those exact matches and things like that. So one of the things that we want to build out with that is what other variables can we put in to try and aggregate that information to make better recommendations.
yeah, it makes sense. So I'm going to start with the question that come up in the Q&A.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you answered that, but Jessica is asking, what is the biggest challenge? You mentioned there are 4 challenges, but is there any specific challenge that can be considered as the biggest one?
I think one of the challenges that sits actually behind all of the challenges is just getting data to analyze.
Yeah.
So because we work with quite a variety of different types of clients across lots of different sectors, we have a whole range of different types of challenges that we run with people. So that might be something very, very scientific and detailed, or technical and mathematical. And obviously the way those challenges are posed and the kind of ideas that come back are very different from going out and asking someone, like your customer base or whatever, what should we do to improve your experience in store at a supermarket. So I think one of the biggest challenges is just trying to calibrate between those different types of implementations and the different kind of use cases. And I think in all likelihood we're going to have to come up with different profiles in terms of how we recommend things based on almost like characteristics of challenges.
Makes sense. Makes sense. And we have another question from Romeo. He asks, how does the filter, in terms of innovation, how does the team filter which idea is ideal and has a better chance of success?
Yeah, so at the moment, as I said, that's quite a manual process. So right now, ideas tend to go through an evaluation stage or several kind of evaluation checkpoints. And you can set different criteria that you'll evaluate the idea against. So it might be, you might be most interested in the ideas that save the most time, or you might be interested in the ideas that are easiest to implement, or something like that. So at the moment it's quite manual, and there's actually specialist evaluators or assigned evaluators that will come in and look at ideas and try and work out which of them are going to be most successful. And it might be that you have evaluators from different fields, so you might get someone from the finance team to come in and have a look, you might get someone from the operational team to come in and have a look. But right now that's a very manual process, and so that is exactly one of the challenges that we're trying to solve at the moment. How do we automate that, and how do we work out what are the characteristics of ideas that are successful? And if you've got 1,000 ideas in the bucket, how do you streamline that down to the top 100 ideas, so you don't have to go through and sift?
And does it generate any data, even if it's manual? Sometimes this manual process generates some data that it can be utilized for the future.
Yeah, exactly. And that taps into this idea of having an ecosystem of ideas, so that if something isn't right for a particular circumstance, you can then look at evaluation criteria, or how someone's ranked an idea, or comments someone's made on an idea. That can all feed into the knowledge bank to then be able to better recommend it for other applications. So maybe different applications, different sectors, or different challenges, or maybe it was just too expensive at that time to implement, but actually miraculously you've got more budget. Never happens. But you never know. Miraculously you might have more budget at a later date where you can think about executing that idea.
All right. This is not a specific data science question, but I think people would love to know about the Wazuka and the work we're doing. So what kind of companies, sectors do you work with?
Which kind of companies? All sorts of different sectors. So we work with banks, excitingly finance. So they do internal challenges around things like operational efficiency. We work with retail. So I mentioned John Lewis and Waitrose is a big client of ours. We work with also public sector bodies as well. So maybe local councils who come up with challenges. I think we actually ran a challenge for the island of Jersey at the beginning of the year. The challenge was around how can Jersey cope with COVID better. So that's a kind of nice example of a big community kind of challenge where they wanted to really open that out to people. So I think there's an opportunity to innovate in nearly every sector, to be quite honest. And we work with a whole broad range of different companies because there's just an opportunity to innovate everywhere.
Makes sense. And another question comes about does it matter if ideas come from a junior person or senior person? Is it a factor now?
No, well, exactly what I was saying. So it doesn't really matter. And sometimes ideas come from surprising places. And I think it doesn't matter whether you're junior, senior, sometimes it doesn't matter whether you even know about the thing. Because the thing is, you might know about a different context or a different kind of scenario that's framing the idea in a different way. So a lot of times we're working with clients on how can they broaden the crowd of people that they're asking, and try and find out who might have those gems of ideas. And it isn't always the people sat at the most senior levels, because in a lot of cases they aren't the people that are getting involved in day-to-day work where there are challenges and problems. So it doesn't really matter what level you're at. It doesn't always matter where you work in an organization. Sometimes it doesn't matter that you're part of that organization. It depends on the type of challenge or question you're asking. But yeah, whole range of people. Like, we have challenges that we have that are completely open to the world. Anyone can come in and have a look at them and get involved. So if you go to our incentive website, there's a whole list of challenges on there. Some of them have financial rewards, so it might be worth people having a look. You can win money, it's great. And anyone can get involved. They're just open challenges. So yeah, there's no limits.
That's fantastic that there is a platform that everyone can come and contribute, and or just get the idea and then work with his team, or see how we can make it better work. That's really interesting area. Duncan Abel has a question. It's very well written, so I'm going to read it for you. Where do you see the biggest blocker for innovation? For example, the speed of development, ROI, intangible benefits, level of audience, or anything like that?
Yeah, everyone always says budget, but I don't know whether that's true. I think a lot of it is culture in organizations, and willingness to innovate. Because I think the thing is, you have to see the benefits of doing it, and the fact that those benefits far outweigh the process of doing it. And in a lot of cases they do, but sometimes that takes a little bit of vision. So I think it's actually the attitude and mentality of organizations that can be the biggest blocker. And the idea that it's, actually it's just another expense. But if you think about it, if you invest in innovation, you actually tend to save more money than you spend on innovation, or you come up with something that generates more revenue. So I would say, for me, the biggest barrier is probably organizational readiness, or willingness to adopt innovation.
Good. I'm going to scroll down a little bit in the questions, because I want to give everyone's the opportunity of questions.
Lots of questions.
Yeah,
Nice.
I'm going down, and there's a question coming from David Newman. He asked, how can you evaluate without theories, or do you have theories of innovation?
I don't really know a lot about theories of innovation. They may exist. It depends. So what tends to happen is that the organizations that are running the challenges, so our clients, are the ones that do a lot of the evaluation. So it works differently in different organizations, and I think they have different things in mind when they're coming to evaluation. So it might be that some of them, like I said earlier, are thinking about finance. It might be that others are thinking about sustainability. So I'm not sure a lot of people are taking a very scientific approach to analysing the ideas. I think from our perspective, in terms of solving that problem and trying to kind of automate it a little bit, we're more looking at the characteristics that are coming out of successful ideas. So we're looking at what variables are going in, and which of those ideas are most successful, and trying to spot the patterns in that. But I think the external clients that we work with, are evaluating those ideas themselves, and I think it's a whole variety of approaches that they're taking. Sometimes it's kind of individual, sometimes it's a collaborative approach. Yeah.
Good. We had a question from Rihanna asking, are you using any specific platform to host the central repository for ideas, or is it just your platform that you have developed?
Yeah, that is the Wazoku platform essentially. So the Wazoku platform is the home for ideas, and it's the platform on which everything happens. So you can go through that end-to-end innovation process using the platform, whether that's kind of posing the challenge, collecting the ideas, doing the evaluation, and then recording the impact of the implementation of ideas as well. So all of that is built across our platform, and there's lots of different functionality that supports that. And the data, where the data science challenge comes in, is like, how do we streamline that? How do we make it easier for people to go through each of those stages without a lot of manual intervention?
I'll move on to the next question. It's coming from Diksha. Which trends that we are currently seeing are going to have a lasting impact on how we use data?
Oh, that's a very interesting.
Yeah, that's
A very interesting question. I mean, I don't know about everyone else, but definitely living through this COVID period, I have been glued to the numbers. I've, every other day, I'm like, what's happening with the figures? What's happening with the figures? And I definitely think it's made people a lot more aware, because there's a lot more kind of scrutiny over what the numbers mean, because they have an impact on people's lives. So, whether the R rates are, at 1 or, 0.7 is making a big difference. And I think that's quite an interesting thing that that people are paying attention to. I think the climate change debate as well is really interesting, and I think that's another one where people are looking at sustainability and the impact of their the impact of their existence on the environment and the world, and what their contribution looks like. So I think there's a number of trends that people are latching onto, and they're getting more interested in terms of the numbers that sit around those trends and how they can make a difference. And yeah, they're the two that I would call out at the moment.
Awesome. Miguel had a question. After thanking for the interesting talk, how do you go about quantifying an idea? I think people need more details now. How would you say that a certain solution proposed is actually good or better than the other solutions?
Yeah, so we have the concept in our system of outcomes or impact metrics, and you can actually put numbers into that. So there is a kind of numerical way of quantifying it, where you can put in, it's going to save X amount of time for someone, or it's going to generate X amount of revenue because it's opening up a market, or we're not going to spend money on paper because we don't need so much till roll, or whatever it might be. So there are ways of quantifying it like that. But I also think there's some kind of more subtle, intangible or less tangible benefits, which I'm really interested in, because I kind of have had a bit of a qualitative research kind of background as well. And some of those things are like, what's the impact on the morale of an organization? How do you kind of measure productivity? And I think I'd be really interested in exploring some of those types of measures, as well as the quantitative measures in terms of time or carbon emissions saved, or money saved, or revenue generated. So there's a whole range of different ways you can measure innovation, and I think it depends on your aims a little bit as well. So some of our customers just say, we don't care about the finances, we want to know about our environmental impact, or some say, all we care about is increasing our revenue because that's what we need for our business right now. And I think that's why different ideas are good at different times as well. So you might be at a certain time looking for something that's going to generate more revenue. At other times you might be looking for something that's going to save costs, and at other times you might be going for your sustainability mission. So yeah, I think different things are good at different times as well.
Makes sense. And for people who are interested, Jessica is asking whether do you have any suggestion for any readings in this field? Anybody can read?
Oh, off the top of my head, I don't know, but I can have a think about it, and maybe if you add me on LinkedIn. I can post some ideas. I'm sure there's lots of literature out there. There's definitely lots of things to read about open innovation at the moment. That's something that's definitely increasing in popularity. But yeah, I can have a little think about that and maybe post that out on LinkedIn in a couple of days.
I'm scrolling up and down still to everybody's chance because we have a long list. So do you run the risk of missing a truly innovative idea by constraining it into a purely scientific process?
Yes, I mean, I definitely think that is a risk, but I also think it's a risk if you're doing it manually as well. So, I think there's a risk in both of those circumstances. If you're overwhelmed and you've got thousands of ideas, chances are, if you find 10 in the first 200, you're probably not going to pay, 10 that you like in the first 200, you're probably not going to pay as much attention to the others. So I don't think I think there probably is a risk that you're not going to find a brilliant idea, but I think there's also equally a risk doing it in a non-scientific way. And actually, one of the nice things is if the idea is always there, you can always go back and revisit it, and maybe someone else will pick up on it so that it doesn't get lost, rather than it having to be a kind of process of collect ideas, get rid of ideas, collect some more ideas, So if it's always there, there's always the chance that you will rediscover it at some point, or it will be resurfaced at a different moment.
Good. There's a question coming about example of measuring parameters for innovation.
I guess this is sort of similar to some of the measures we were just talking about. So I don't know whether you're getting at the same sort of thing, like in terms of sometimes there are financial measures, sometimes there are environmental measures, sometimes there are, it might be revenue, it might be cost. Do you think that's what the question's getting at, Amin? I don't know.
Yeah, makes sense, because Dominic is asking the kind of similar question about the impact on market capitalization as well.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends as an organization what you're looking for in terms of innovation, and there are going to be different levers for implementing different ideas and different types of impact. And I think that's one of the things that when you're going in to evaluate ideas, you need to think about what is most important to me as a business. Is it the market cap? Is it revenue? Is it, is it developing IP? Is it revenue? Is it cost saving? Is it, making everyone more productive? Is it making morale higher? And there'll be impacts in each of those areas, and it's just what's most important to you, and that's probably part of the evaluation process. And there will probably be characteristics that we can pull out that sort of lend themselves more towards increasing impact in each of those areas.
Makes sense. Apparently, people, just as you were speaking, checking the platform. So Richard is asking, in Innocentive, there is only 2 challenges currently running. Is it typical, or there's something in the background?
Oh, I don't know. I actually, because I don't get involved in launching them, I thought there are a few more than that. But yeah, keep having a look, and there'll be more added.
And in terms of recruitment, is there any internship and data scientist recruitment at the moment happening? Romy is asking.
Yeah, at the moment we aren't looking for a data scientist. We're looking for some developers, though, if anyone's interested in development roles. We've got a couple of roles that we're recruiting. I think in all likelihood, we'll probably be looking for more people in the new year, but given that things are a little bit uncertain at the moment generally in the world, we're not going full steam ahead on a lot of recruitment right now. But yeah, we'll always post things up, and I usually post things on LinkedIn as well whenever there's opportunities.
Yeah. We have only 5 minutes left. Are you happy to carry on with a couple of more questions?
Yeah, sure.
Right. I see some of the questions are coming repeatedly, so that's why I'm removing them. I think you have answered this one as well. That's interesting one. any more details on Habitat for Humanity project? Just looking for a specific example of how typical project might go.
Oh yeah, so that's one of our open innovation projects that's running at the moment. So what typically happens with those sorts of challenges is that someone will come to us with a very specific problem, and we'll work with the organization to go and design a challenge. And sometimes those organizations want to give a reward for those challenges. So some of them, like I said, are for monetary awards. And typically they'll post out the details of the challenge and give a description of what they're looking for, and then people will have the opportunity to submit responses to those challenges. And sometimes that's on an individual basis, or sometimes it's on a team basis. And sometimes, as I said earlier, those challenges might be quite technical or scientific. So we've had quite a lot of medical type challenges where research teams will submit papers, and quite often it's quite a long process where people go away and they do research and then they have to submit results and things like that. So it can vary, and all the details are on the individual challenges. So there should be a description of exactly what you have to do and how the challenge will run. And then if you decide to join the crowd, then there's a kind of a place you can follow the process through for those various challenges, and you get updated at different stages, so you can see how well your submission is doing, and what the responses and how they are being evaluated.
Yep. I think this is going to be the last question I'm going to raise because I'm conscious about time. Riona is asking, let's assume a scenario where I'm an investor and a
Yeah.
startup comes to me with their ideas. How could you use data science to decide which idea to invest on? And
Ooh.
considering the lack of information, I might have to translate trends, images, etc. So is Wazuko is helping in that situation, do you think?
That's not something that we're looking at the moment. One of the things we would like to do, though, is actually connect particularly kind of startups or smaller businesses with larger organizations that maybe have challenges that they can solve. Um, so rather than just having a crowd of individuals or smaller teams, one of the things that we are exploring is how we can connect startups, SMEs to some of these challenges as well. And maybe kind of they would have a profile of some of the things they have to offer, and we could then match those so that they could then specifically work on that problem for a period of time. So that's one of the things we're looking at. We've not really done it in the context of investment yet, or we've not kind of thought about that, but maybe that's something we can explore in future. But definitely that idea of, SMEs or startups or whatever, who perhaps can make an impact in larger organizations, is something that you'll see in future.
Brilliant. Thank you again. I'm going to, on behalf of everyone, I would like to thank you, Sally. It was great having you, and patiently you answered many of the questions. There are some questions not being answered, but I can just ask the panelists to gather this information, and perhaps you may find them useful. And I would like
Yes.
to thank everyone who gathered at this Lunch and Learn as well. It was interesting to know about the innovation, even in the field of innovation for making innovation.
Yeah.
I'm going to say goodbye to everyone, and until our next meeting.
Thank you.
Stay safe.
Bye.
Bye
Bye.
now.